Your second and final speaker for tonight is Dr. Jeanette McConnell. While completing her chemistry PhD in Sydney, Australia at the University of New South Wales, Jeanette discovered the joy of science education and hasn't looked back. She now works as the Education Outreach and Diversity Director for the NSF Center for Aerosol Impacts on Chemistry of the Environment, combining her chemistry knowledge with a passion for making science fun. And today she's here to start a conversation about imagining new possibilities for what is meant to be a scientist. You guys, this seems like somebody who is right up our alley and somebody who's soon to be an old nerd night San Diego classic. So it's now my honor to present Dr. Jeanette McConnell.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. I had a lot of fun listening to Ryan's talk. So I am here to talk to you sort of about what it means to be a scientist, but really I'm here to change it and to just throw away what we think about as this scientist. But to give this presentation, this science presentation, I wanted to make sure that I put on my scientist outfit, right? So you all take me seriously. And anyway, before we get into more of what I want to talk about, I have questions about you, right? I will talk about myself a little bit more, but the first thing I want to do is hear from you. So we've got some polls. So if Zed, you could just go through poll 1, 2, 3 as people answer, and we'll get to know a little bit about each other because that's more fun. So let's hear from you. See if these polls will work. All right. So the first question is, are you a scientist? I want to know the amount of us who are scientists or not a scientist. Both are equally amazing. Here we go. Oh, this is amazing. Look at this, almost exactly split, right? And well done to Zed for getting the polls to work. I am very happy. So we've got 42% yes scientists, 58% no scientists, right? So we're totally split down the middle, which is perfect. Okay, so poll number 2 is another very important question. If you launch that one. What are you drinking? So I have margaritas, which I'm currently drinking through a straw because of my mustache. But what are you drinking? I want to know. I think it's just me and margaritas, but look, we've got lots of wine drinkers and people drinking something else. All right, I see someone saying boozy boochcraft, boozy kombucha, yum. Okay, and then the very last one for right now, the third poll, you can launch that one. Are you eligible to vote? And if you are you registered? This is a very important question. All right, we're very close. If you are eligible to vote and you have not registered, most states, you can still go and register. It's super duper easy. Make sure you do it. If you're not sure how to do it, you can send me an email and I will walk you through it. We will get you registered if you are able to vote. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. So I am excited to see that we're a split audience and that the vast majority of us are registered to vote. That's great. Like Robert said, I am from this place called the NSF Center for Aerosol Impacts on Chemistry of the Environment. It's a very long name, but just like Ryan said, I would just be completely beside myself if I did not say something about the fact that we are in a pandemic that is spread via airborne transmission, which means it's spread via these aerosols. Aerosols are just any tiny bit of stuff that's floating in the air. So when like soot or ash. And so when you talk, these things come out of your mouth. And so if you have COVID, your aerosols have COVID and they can infect someone else. So it's just really important that you wear a mask. That is a super duper easy way to protect yourself and others right now. It's our best line of defense at the moment, actually. So if you're not wearing a mask, when you go out or especially when you're inside with other people, just freaking put one on. It's not hard, all right? And most of you are probably doing it because you're all nerds. So I'm talking to the choir here. All right, anyway, now to why I am actually here. I really want to talk about who gets to call themselves a scientist, right? Who are these people? Why the heck are they so special? And how is this selectivity ruining everything? Like everything. Okay, maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but I still don't really understand why it's so selective who gets to call themselves a scientist. And basically, the bottom line here is that I'm done with this idea of this old white guy in a lab coat as the scientist. So I'm going to take my, it's great that you can see yourself in Zoom, so I can fix my hair real quick. Take my costume off. So you can see that I am still a scientist, even when I am stripping for you. A big old queer, right, with multicolored hair, wearing a tie-dye t-shirt, right? This doesn't change anything I just said, or does it for you? Did I just completely lose all credibility, right? Now that I look like this, am I like not a scientist anymore, right? So this is sort of the idea that I want to talk about today, and how these ideas like are in our heads. But before we get into that, I think it's important that we take a step back and we talk about what is science. Because if I want to talk about scientists, these are people who do science, right? It's all the people who are doing science. So in order to talk about them, we need to talk about what is science first. Okay, so this is the next poll. If you've noticed, I'm getting you to collaborate with me here, hopefully to keep you listening to me. So if you can go ahead and launch poll number 4, this one asks you to look at these 4 different definitions of science and choose the best one. This is the best kind of multiple choice question where you have to choose the best answer. And so I want you all to sort of choose the best one. I'll give you a couple of minutes once the poll's up because these are kind of long, not a couple minutes, like maybe 30 seconds, be fast. And to decide which of these is the best definition of science. All right, I don't see the poll yet. There we go. Awesome. So what is science? Just pick one, whichever one you think is the best. I am a lot more comfortable without all of that stuff on. All right. Now, have there been enough answers? Should we see the results? A lot of people picked the last one. I was expecting there to be more varied answers here because these are all actually definitions of science that I took from 4 different dictionaries. So just to sort of show that there's like a lot of different ways to think about what is science, that there is no best answer, right? We all come at this from a different angle. But most people have said, right, the intellectual and practical activity of encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Okay, that's a pretty good answer. And the reason I'm putting this up here is because I want us to be on some kind of similar platform before we move forward and talk about scientists. So this is another poll question. I sort of conglomerated these different definitions into one, and here it is. Pictures keep getting away. So you can see is this a good enough definition of science, right? I don't mean is it perfect. I don't mean did we spend 3 days talking about it together to decide if we all agree. I mean, is it good enough for us to sort of all agree that science is a knowledge system focused on studying and making sense of the world through observation and experimentation? So you can go ahead and answer, and we'll see what we think. Maybe I should put my costume back on. I might be more convincing. All right, I think we can see the results. Yes, okay, I've got one absolutely not, and probably one not really. So I was expecting this to happen, but what I'm gonna ask of those people who said absolutely not or not really is to sort of just come on this journey with me, you know, entertain the idea. Despite the current political state we are all in, I think it is possible for us to keep having a conversation together even though we disagree. Gasp. So let's keep going and sort of all hold this in mind, that this is what we're using as our definition of science. What's on the screen now? Okay, cool. Thank you for your participation thus far. Now I have another thing for us to do together. You are not going to get a moment's rest. Well, you will in a second. But the next thing I want us to talk about, we're going to shift into thinking about what are scientists, right? And so I want you to put together some descriptive words that you would use to describe a scientist. So I need to grab this link and I will put it in the chat box. All right, so you should be able to go to that link that I just put in the chat and share some words that you associate with scientists, and we should be able to all see it together. This is like a brand new thing. I've never done this before. So let's have fun and see if it works. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. All right, so we've got some people put on the side here. I'll read those too. We've got inquisitive, curious, systematic, nerd, questioning, intelligent, sexy. I love that. Data, intelligent. Did I already say that? I think I did. Maybe I've had too many margaritas. All right, so hypothesizing, animals, research. Oh, I'm so excited this is working. High water pants wearers. Oh, this is great. Right, so you can see that actually there's a pretty good correlation between some of the words, right, that we're seeing here. Intelligent, data, inquisitive, curious, and sexy, which definitely wasn't expecting to be on there, but I'm glad it is. And so that's pretty cool. All right, so now let's go back to my presentation. Now that we know what we all sort of think about scientists. And I want to dial in on sort of what society thinks of scientists. And maybe we're a unique population because we are half scientists, so we think pretty highly of ourselves. Clearly, we think we're sexy. So if they poll like the public, though, about what they think of scientists, and generally it's good as well, right? They think scientists help solve problems, that we're good for humanity, and we want to make life better for people. But they also think that we're odd and peculiar, right? And while I am not opposed to being odd or peculiar, kind of take pride actually in being odd and peculiar, this creates a division, right, between everyone else and scientists because they're seen as this like other odd thing, right? Or this super intelligent thing, or this super inquisitive person, right? Someone who is not like everyone else, right? And so this is sort of what I'm trying to dial in here is that we're starting to see that we're associating some characteristics with scientists and it creates a bit of a separation between everyone else. And so they don't quite be able to relate to the identity of scientist. And so I was asking myself, why didn't some of these words come up when we talk about who are scientists or what words we associate with them? Like, why aren't scientists thoughtful, right? So a lot of what we just described are thoughtful things, but why isn't that the word we use? Or compassionate, right? Fun, hopeful. Why are these words not associated with scientists? And when I was putting this together, this presentation together, I was thinking to myself, how great would it have been if when I was a kid, Bill Nye and Mr. Rogers sort of like merged into one human, and that was who I thought a scientist was. It would still have been some old white guy, but he would have been like not quirky and eccentric. He would have just been kind and thoughtful. And there are lots of kind and thoughtful scientists that exist, but we don't see them, right? We see like the cold scientist or the mad scientist. This is the depiction that we're getting. And we internalize this, right? You can't separate yourself from those images, no matter how much you want to, they are still inside of your brain. Okay, so because of this, often as scientists, we end up having to leave some parts of ourselves outside of what we do. Right, so I am kind of silly, I can be kind of loud, I'm also very queer. And so sometimes I do my best to like leave these things outside, right? I try not to, but sometimes I feel like I have to in order to be taken seriously. And so I'm just sort of wondering if any of the other scientists have felt this way. So if you can put the next poll up, poll 6. If you've ever felt like you have to leave some of your identity outside of this science room in order to be taken seriously. Just curious. It's all anonymous as well if you're nervous about that kind of stuff. Because I know that this is true for me. In certain circumstances, I felt that way, especially when I was a young scientist. Maybe not so much now, I don't care as much, but when I was a young scientist. Okay, let's see the results. What do we think? Oh my gosh. That's way higher percentage than I was expecting. Look at that. Like all of us, except one person who's done, right? I don't blame you. It's late. So we're all having to leave parts of us, or feel like we should be leaving parts of us outside of the science spaces, right? But there are parts of us that we cannot leave. You cannot leave your race. You cannot leave your gender. You often cannot leave your sexuality. Things like this, you can't leave them. They stay with you. And so you're subjected to these like huge issues that we have in society that play out in science just like they do everywhere else, right? You're subjected to racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. I'm seeing when I put this together that this is like a really intense slide. Like just black and white with racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia written on it. But that's kind of what I want to get across. So these things exist, right? And we can't leave them aside. And because we have this idea put into our heads of this old white guy as a scientist, we associate anything that is not associated with an old white guy as not scientist. And that includes like the effects of all of these different kinds of oppression. Okay. Now, this has been going on for a really long time. And so people have been fighting against this, right? We all know about the movements and all of the great things that have happened in order to try to combat the effects of these like isms or phobias in the sciences. So I put a few of the big organizations that do this on the screen here. I'm not going to walk through them all. I don't think it's exciting. But what I wanted to open it up though is I know a lot of you probably do this kind of work. So if you want to share any orgs that do this kind of like combating the isms work, put them in the chat and we can like learn from each other about what some of the smaller organizations might be, or any big ones that I'm missing. If you want to add them, that would be super fun. Otherwise, I just want to point out that No Boucher and Title IX were instituted in the 70s. That was 50 years ago, right? And so that means like these isms are done, right? Like in science, we're great, we like fixed it. Right? No, it's like not how it works. And so we think we're seeing improvement. So it's not to say that nothing has happened, right? I'm having this conversation with you. That is a huge improvement. This would not have been possible 50 years ago. But some of the things that we're seeing is that there's lots of people who are from these underrepresented groups, historically underrepresented groups, namely women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But they often make up just like the lower level positions. So this is a really good example from UN Women, where you can see that while women make up actually 70% of health workers, they only hold 25% of senior leadership roles, right? So there's this distance between actually shifting the culture of these places. And you see the same in pharma CEOs. Like I could not make this up, y'all. I looked up the top 10 highest paid pharmaceutical CEOs and look. Like they're all these like old-ish white guys and there's one Black man. And he was actually the 10th. He just made the list. Right. And so I just want to show that although we sort of feel like there's more people, especially as a scientist who's like sometimes on the periphery, I do feel more included than I have in the past, than people like me have in the past. But I'm not running a university either, right? People like me are not running the university. And so it's important to notice that. So my question is, why isn't it fixed then? If we're doing all these efforts, like why haven't we seen the shifts in the leadership? And in my opinion, it's because we have not altered what it means to be a scientist. We still in our heads have this image of an old white guy as the default scientist. And so what that does is it puts these white supremacist patriarchal characteristics as what it means to be a scientist. And if you don't fit that, it's really difficult to become a high-level scientist because it's just not what a scientist is. No matter how much we consciously try to fight this bias, it's still there. And so what's happening, in my opinion, is that we are just merely allowing more people to try and fit themselves into this identity, right? So instead of changing what it means to be a scientist, more people are allowed to try and conform themselves into this idea of what it means to be a scientist. And so what we need to do instead is to tear it all down and rethink how we're defining the scientist identity, right? So really, instead of sort of trying to deconstruct or fit ourselves into this place, like, what do we want it to mean? What if you could choose what it meant and who got to be a scientist, what would you say? Okay, I'm gonna take a little drink here because I just ranted for a while. So I think everyone should take a drink as well. Okay, and then I'm gonna shift gears and start talking about, well, what does it mean? Like, how can we shift who gets to be a scientist? What are some of the ways we can do that? Like, what are some new people that we can welcome in and be like, you're scientists too? And so I put up our definition of science again, because I want you to think about who can do this. So if science is just a knowledge system that's focused on studying and making sense of the world through systematic observation and experimentation, who can do this? And why have we already limited it to just this really selective group of people who can associate themselves with patriarchal and white supremacist ideals? Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple that I think are really important, and I would love to hear if you have any. So the first that I want to talk about is age and education level. So I think that children are scientists. Maybe they're not always systematic. Sometimes they are. And I think we're like just not letting them know that what they're doing is science, that they are scientists. And so we're not valuing the input that they could give. Like, there's tons of really amazing young people who create things, right? And solve big problems. Same with education level. And this is where I have a poll question I'd love to ask everybody. So if you want to launch that one. And this is for a scientist and non-scientists. So if you're a scientist, when did you identify that way? Like, when did you say, okay, yeah, I'm a scientist now? Was it K to 12, undergrad, grad school, or when you got a science job? And then if you're not a scientist, when would you consider someone else a scientist? How much education do they need for you to think of them as a scientist? All right, let's see the results. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, look at that. Half the people say we can consider our K to 12 people scientists. That's great, right? But a lot of people not so much, right? Or you didn't consider yourself that way. I know for me, I did not consider myself a scientist until probably halfway through grad school, which would have meant I'd already been doing science for maybe 7 years, a really long time, right? That I'd been actively doing science, even science, if we really narrow the definition to be working in a lab even. And so it's because we have this idea that you need to be some kind of senior person in order to have this identity. All right, so the next one is nationality. So when you put into your head, who's a scientist, where are they from? And for me, it's really funny. They're always from Europe, right? When I think of a scientist, they're always from Europe. And I think this goes back to the Enlightenment and all these things I learned about as a kid. But why? There's scientists everywhere, and we really don't see it that way. And even when people are sometimes from places that we don't expect scientists to be, right, we're not treating them in the same way. And this applies also to indigenous communities. So I just read this book, and it was probably the best book I've read in the past 5 years. It was so good. I'm not going to try to explain it because I would do just a terrible job, but I really think you should read it. It made me think in a way that I have never thought before, and really changed, and not quite changed yet. I'm still digesting, even though I think I finished it maybe a couple of weeks ago now, but it was so good. And it talks all about the different ways of thinking, which is kind of what I'm trying to get at with this presentation, is that we've been suckered into thinking about scientists in this certain way, and I don't think we need to. I think it's detrimental. All right, the next one is attire. This one seems kind of silly, but it bothers me so much. So when you look at this picture, which person is the scientist, right? The guy with the lab coat on. When really the number of scientists who wear lab coats is so small. Most scientists don't wear lab coats. Even when we work with children, people want to give them lab coats so they feel like a scientist. And I'm no, let's stop doing that. You don't need to wear a lab coat to be a scientist. You need to ask questions in a systematic way to learn about the world, right? And so this one as well too, like goes to sexism as well, where women aren't allowed to wear certain things, or if you do wear certain kinds of clothes, you're seen as like less than a scientist. So my professor as a graduate student, she used to wear dresses all the time. That's all she wore. And she felt very like this was like a statement, like that she was wearing dresses, because scientists, especially chemists, don't wear dresses. And the opposite side of this is I have a cousin who used to come to family gatherings wearing their like photo lab coat from the CVS. They worked in like the photo department, and they would wear this lab coat as like a sign of respect, right? So we're like, really, it's convoluted to think that just this piece of clothing gives you some kind of, I don't know, expertise. It's ridiculous. Sorry, that one is like a bit of a pet peeve of mine. All right, and then the last one I want to talk about right now is historical location. So trivia question on this poll, who is in this picture? Whenever the poll shows up. Who is this? Lizard men, Homo reptilia, your worst nightmare, or is it your body mod fantasy? All right, let's see the results. Okay, this is a lot of people said this is their body mod fantasy. We can be friends, you and I, those people who put that. Okay, so it's actually Homo reptilia for my Doctor Who nerds out there. That it's some of my favorite episodes are with the Homo reptilia. And the idea here is to really, in Doctor Who, these Homo reptilia are like prehistoric human-like lizards that were really advanced, like civilization. And so the idea to think about here is we have decided that only like since the Enlightenment, there's been scientists. And especially there's this idea of the myth of like the barbarians and like Neanderthals were dumb, right? All of these things, but they're not true, right? We don't have enough evidence to say that they're true, and there's actually evidence showing the contrary. And so I just want us to think about, why are we the only ones who get to do science? And what makes us so special? I feel like it's really elitist to think that right now we're the only ones doing science. No, people have done science forever, since there's been curious human-like people on the planet, right? Okay, I'm glad to see that there was some Doctor Who fans in the audience as well. Hi, me too. Okay, so I've put some of these ways that we're like limiting what it means to be a scientist on the screen. There are so many more. I just don't think I have the time or want to bore you by talking about all of them. But if we can take a second, and if you want to think about how else are we gatekeeping who can claim the scientist identity, and put it in the chat, and we can talk about it if you have any ideas. So I'm going to pause, have another drink, and let you put something in there. It can be like a longer sentence as well if you want. But how are we gatekeeping who gets to be a scientist? Oh, okay, let's see. We've got some answers already. I see we've got gatekeeping and academic publishing. Good God. Is there a gate? It's like absolutely insane how much gatekeeping happens there, and how many conversations happen behind closed doors with that kind of stuff. Job descriptions, teachers, funding, how funding is distributed, the years of experience, right? That's kind of like that education level. We're not like only acknowledging that people who've done something for a certain amount of time know what they're doing. Like, no, right? We want fresh ideas. Sometimes people who've been doing the same thing for a long time are terrible at it. Let's see. So sense of humor. Yeah. Scientists aren't meant to be funny. Just people with disabilities, of course, right? having children or not, publications list, access to education, income, years of education, IQ, right, whatever that means. Especially that's important because one of those words that many of us put down for a scientist was intelligent. What does that mean? Oh, I totally just remembered one of the things I was going to include in this talk that I did not was a great quote about this, about the different kinds of ways of being intelligent and how we only value this like teeny tiny way, right? Like people have so many ways of being intelligent. Ethnicity, language, resources, and technologies. Yeah, there are so many different ways that we are gatekeeping what it means. And I think the first step in all of this, like I don't have the answer, right? I don't think there is an answer, but the first step I think is to really acknowledge that these are the ways that we are gatekeeping and that each of us contributes to it, whether you're in science or not, by the way that you view scientists, and if you are a scientist, how you treat other people within the community, the scientific community, that is. Usually when I say the community, I mean the queer community. So that was kind of like, I had to correct there, into the science community. All right. Now I want to go in a little bit to the impacts of what this gatekeeping does. So I expanded on that earlier slide of the top 10 highest paid pharma CEOs, and now it's top 25. And is it homogenous? like they're, I was looking at it and I was trying to decide if like some of them could be brothers. Like I was like, maybe this guy, right, is like related to this guy. And that's how similar they all are. And it's sad, but I think it's really important for us to see this, because I feel like I'm told a lot that science is better, right? Like it's more diverse, like it's welcoming, it's inclusive. And then I see things like this and I'm like, well, I think we still have a long way to go. The other big impact that I think all of this gatekeeping has, which I alluded to earlier, is that it creates this like us versus them mentality, where it's scientists versus the public. And we are seeing that play out massively right now and be exploited right now by politicians, where people feel like scientists are almost above them, right? They're smarter than me. They know more than me, which is not true, right? It's not true, but they feel that way. And so they might know more than people about a specific subject, right? But they don't know more than people in general. And so it creates this like, you know, us versus them mentality where you're not trusting and you get defensive is what happens. And so this data is just showing how it varied based on party, but that as people had higher, especially among Democrats, but it did happen in Republicans as well, as people had higher scientific knowledge, they were more trusting of scientific results, right? And so for me, a person is not going to have a high scientific knowledge if they don't feel welcomed into that community. If you don't feel like you are a part of science, why would you have a high science knowledge? How would you even get it? And even if you had it, you might say, no, I don't. So sometimes for me, even I have a PhD in chemistry, and I sometimes struggle to call myself a scientist because I don't work in a wet lab anymore. Right? And so, but I'm a scientist and I have to claim that identity for myself because I put a lot of work in to get it. Right? And it's just, I think it's important for us to recognize that it matters how much someone can relate to scientists. Especially right now, it's just insanity how much we're seeing the politicians use this divide to create so much confusion. And it's really disappointing. Okay. Now I'm on to my next word cloud. And I want us to take a step back. And that was a bit like heavy and a lot of negative stuff. But science is actually really awesome. Like, I think science is one of the best things that we do. I love it. I love that I get to ask like as many questions as I want. And then that's a good thing, right? Like questioning authority is like a good thing in science. And so let me put this link into the chat box for you all. Hey, where's the chat? Oh, there it is. Okay, and then we're going to look at, I want you to put just some words down that you would associate with the goal of science, right? So let's get back into this like positive space. Like, what do we want to do with all this? Why do we even do science? I mean, why would we want more people to associate themselves with science? What is it we want to accomplish? I think this is number 2. Let's see what we get. Oh, heal the world and others. That's beautiful. Understand, perspective, truth, facts and knowledge, representation, help, longevity, right? Sustainable, improve, health, betterment of society, right? And a lot of this matches with what people think about scientists. So why can't we bring those people who think this about scientists and show them that they can be a part of this community? I'm not trying to say that all of these people are like experts in aerosols and wildfires, or that they're experts in cancer treatments, but that they do have the ability to think like scientists, right? And we can bring them in. And then I also think this would help with this. What's happened recently I've seen is that it's like scientists who are not actually experts in, especially with COVID, in this like virus transmission, are like saying things about it. Like they know what they're talking about. Everyone's like, well, they're a scientist, so they must know. No, it's not how it works. And so I think if we like showed people that they also can think like scientists, but when you want to know about a specific thing, you need to go to the person who's studying that, right? It's not about who a scientist is or not a scientist. It's about what they study specifically. Okay, this is great. Anyone else? Truth, world, oh, so good. Y'all are amazing. All right, and then I've got one more question, and it's this one. And it's about imagining something different. So if, it's this last question here, we did in the beginning, where we picked words that were associated with scientists, but if you could choose the words, like new ones that you would invent, not ones that are based on this idea that was given to us, but what are some of the new words that you would like to be associated with scientists? Put them in here. Oh, let me get the link. That's right, I gotta get the link. Otherwise you can't do anything. There it is. Okay, that's the next link. Empathetic. Love it. Oh my gosh, someone else put empath. How great is that? Peace, doers, respect, security, activist, daring. Oh, I love that one. Sexy again. We are all very attractive. I mean, it's like undeniable. Let's see, collaborator. I'm also enjoying that. Oh, see how all these words are staying small? Such sexy. It's killing me. Okay, so it's showing that we all have such different ideas, right? We bring such diverse perspectives to what it could mean to be a scientist. Whereas when we were sticking with this like rigid definition that society has given us, we were all with like inquisitive, intelligent, you know, words like that. Curious, that was the other one that was big. What else we got? Imaginative, talkative, advocate, mindful. This is great. Someone put orgasm in there as well. I mean, it goes right along with sexy. I'm going to say it. If you put it in there, I'm going to say it. Just, weird. Yeah, this is great. Okay. So I hope that my like yelling today on the internet about this sort of just gets us to think. Like I said, I don't have any answer. There isn't one answer to this big question. But I'm really thankful to have the opportunity to even talk about it. And then this is a picture of me in Antarctica drinking a beer that I brewed to drink in Antarctica. And so I just wanted to put this picture up there because even in this picture, I am still a scientist.